Hi, this is my first ever recorded, edited video that I have done all by myself. I shouldn't be nervous. I've been Fire Guy Ryan for almost 3 years now, but this is my first time doing a video. I saw that I recently crossed the 500 subscriber mark on YouTube, so firstly, thank you all. And secondly, I figured I should probably do something to justify that. It's not really fair. Whatever. I am here today to discuss my top 10 books of the year, and I'm gonna go over them all in descending order because that's how countdowns work. All right, this is weird. This is awkward. I'm just gonna start with number 10. I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like no matter what I do, the last book on this list is gonna be. It feels like insulting to put whatever book at number 10 out of 10, best of the year. It's the worst of the best, which is obviously not true. There are plenty of books that did not make this list. I read quite a lot of comics, uh, and I picked 10. I picked 10 good ones for the end of the year, and I've got number 10 right here. Just because it's number 10 is not a slight against this book in any way. This book just barely made it onto my best books of the year, and it kind of honestly came in right at the end of the run. Um, I'm talking about The Me You Love in the Dark. This is a 5-issue series from Image Comics, written by Scotty Young with art by Jorge Corona. This book turned into something that I was not expecting, and by the end of it, I was kind of in love. The story is about a woman who is an artist who decides to move into this really creepy house, and she does this on purpose in order to kind of reignite her painting career. She hasn't really painted anything cool in a while. She's got a gallery show coming up, and she needs to kind of get moving. So she moves into this creepy abandoned house to kind of spark some, creative output. And honestly, the first couple issues of this comic, I didn't love it. It wasn't my favorite book. It wasn't my least favorite book by any stretch of the means, but it was very much middle of the road. Like, okay, this is a book I'm reading. I don't hate it. I don't love it. I'm going to keep going. But then as the final issues kind of ramped up and the overall pace and scope of this book made itself known, it really kind of hit me in a way that's hard to describe. It's part ghost story, it's part love story, it's part horror story, and it's really hard to describe without giving anything away. It's just a 5-issue series. Honestly, a lot of the books on my list are short, limited series, which for me is a very good thing. I really appreciate a limited book with a deadline, and this certainly has that. So, I don't think the trade collection of this is out yet, but when it does come out, I think you should give it a shot if you haven't already read this book. This just barely came in number 10 on my top 10 books of 2021. Me, You Love in the Dark. And then here at number 9, this is another comic that is short. Me, You Love in the Dark was only 5 issues. My number 9 pick was only 3 issues, and it just recently wrapped up. It is Batman the Imposter from DC Comics. This is written by Mattson Tomlin with art by Andrea Sorrentino. And I love this book. I really have a lot of DC books on my pull list. I have been underwhelmed by a lot of recent Batman comics, but this one is something fresh and original, and it's brutal, and it's short, and it's dark, and it's gritty, and I hate using those two words to describe a Batman story because that feels very overused and irritating. I'm kind of mad with myself for using those words, but I'm going to keep going. This comic is about corporations in Gotham realizing that the best way to kind of put an end to Batman is to put this Batman lookalike out into the city and have him murder people on camera. And then the news will show this footage, and the police will turn against Batman, and the citizens of Gotham will turn against Batman. And now he will have to not only fight crime and fight supervillains, but he also has to fight the public perception of him that is now going down the tubes, all the while trying to figure out who this imposter is and how to stop him. It's just a really short brief, powerful 3-issue story. And the word powerful is actually pretty appropriate because the artwork in here by Andrea Sorrentino, if you are familiar with his artwork, he uses a lot of little squares. It's a weird way to put it, but that's really what it is. There's a lot of little squares in his artwork, and that is used to great effect in this story because every punch that is thrown, every bone that is broken is kind of magnified with this tiny little square that shows you an X-ray, like an X-ray image of someone's jaw getting broken or like the bones in their arm snapping. And you feel every impact from every punch that like Batman throws against villains in this book. And it's a small touch, but it makes this comic hit harder, for lack of a better phrase. The writer of this comic, Mattson Tomlin, is one of the writers on the upcoming Batman film. That's actually coming out in a couple of months now, that it's 2022. Having watched the trailers for that movie and having read Batman the Imposter, they feel very close. They feel very similar. This book feels like what I hope the upcoming movie, will feel like. I say this as somebody who has recently kind of grown out of the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy of Batman movies. They're good, but like, they're not my favorite movies. Definitely not my favorite superhero movies. And I am ready for a new take on the cinematic Batman. It's actually been 10 years since Dark Knight Rises came out. The last time we had a solo Batman movie. It's been 10 years. I'm very much ready for this. Assuming you don't count the Lego Batman movie. That's a solo Batman movie. But that doesn't count, even though that movie rules. But yeah, Batman the Imposter, 3 issues. This takes my number 9 pick for Best of 2021. Okay, so that brings us to number 8 on my countdown of the top 10 comics of 2021. Number 8 is going to Stray Dogs. This book had to make my list. This might be the biggest no-brainer on this list. For me, this comic came out of nowhere. It was advertised as a horror comic based on dogs, drawn in a cute cartoon way, which is exactly what it is, but that was enough to hook me before anything else was released about this comic. So I was in basically from the get-go with this book, and this is another 5-issue miniseries. Despite how cute this comic looks, despite the adorable little puppies that you meet all throughout this series, it is dark, it is scary, it is sad. You really feel for these characters, for these dogs. Like, it's weird. They are just dogs, but they are also like full-blown characters that you feel emotions for and loss for, because not all of them survive. This is a horror comic, and I don't know. It's been out for a while. Everybody knows Stray Dogs. Everyone knows it's about a guy who adopts dogs after murdering their owners. That's not really a spoiler, I don't think. If it is, I'm sorry, but you should have read Stray Dogs by now. It is absolutely worth reading. It came out of nowhere. It's written by Tony Fleece and Trish Forstner, 2 creators who are mostly known for doing My Little Pony and a bunch of like cartoony licensed properties that I've never had any experience with. They were not on my radar as creators, and I think that's part of the reason this book did so well, is because it came out of nowhere and nobody was expecting this book to hit as hard as it did. And this is the first example of a comic that I have bought several copies of the trade and given them out to people because it's just that good. And yeah, the 2-issue short story follow-up anthology series is out right now. It's also really good. So if you do like Stray Dogs, don't forget to pick up Stray Dogs Dog Days. Number 1 is out now, and number 2 is coming out eventually. Next month, I think. Don't quote me on that. Okay, so we are now up to number 7 on my top 10 list. This one, honestly, is the only Marvel comic that made it on my list of best 2021 books. I'm not the biggest Marvel fan, and a lot of their greatest series just ended this year. Marvel is a little bit in flux for me right now, but there was one standout book that just finished a few weeks ago, and it is Kang the Conqueror. It's a 5-issue series. Big surprise there. Most of these books so far have been 5-issue series. I went with the variant covers for this entire run, and this particular one is done by Patrick Gleason. This 5-issue Kang the Conqueror series is written by Colin Kelly and Jackson Lanzing, with art by Carlos Magno. Honestly, a creative team I have never heard of, I'm not familiar with, but I don't care. This book blew me away. I don't know a whole lot about Kang, really. He's kind of having a moment right now after being in the Loki series. They're clearly building up to something with Kang in the MCU, maybe making him like the next Thanos, the next overall big bad. So it seemed appropriate that they put out a 5-issue Kang series to kind of get into the character's history and what makes him tick, and this book certainly does that. Marvel has been doing a lot of self-contained miniseries about single characters lately. Some of them have not been so great. I recently read the entire Iron Fist Heart of the Dragon. I think that was 6 issues. And there was a Black Knight, Curse of the Ebony Blade, that also recently wrapped up. Those weren't as good. But when it comes to this Kang book, and I know there was a book called Magneto Testament that I have not read that goes into his origin story. That's supposed to be fantastic. And there's also a book, one of my favorite books, actually. I got it right here. Red Skull Incarnate. This is actually the first single issues I bought ever at a comic shop, so it's sentimentally important to me, and it's a really good book. I really like their villain-focused miniseries, and this Kang book is about the adult, fully formed bad guy Kang traveling back to his own past, where he is a young, innocent child who has yet to be bad, to be evil. I don't want to give too much away, and I'm hoping that I'm doing a good job of describing this book, but I know I'm not. There's so much emotion in this book, which doesn't make sense. It's a Marvel comic. It's a superhero comic. It shouldn't have that sort of feeling to it, but there's this tragic kind of inevitability that you pick up while reading these issues, because each issue jumps forward a little bit in time, and we follow Kang as he grows older and learns how to be a villain. But then by the time we get to the end of the series, since it's a time travel book, we end up kind of going back to the beginning. You learn a lot about what you thought you knew from the earlier issues by the time you get to the end. I'm trying to explain what's happening without really explaining it, so you're not spoiled and you can read this book fresh if you may have skipped it. I would strongly recommend checking this book out because it's just very well done. It's every issue I finished, I would close it and just kind of have to take a deep breath and like process what I read before going on to the next comic in my stack, in my weekly pull list. That's not something I usually do. Usually I try and bust through them as quick as possible. It's something you have to process and kind of sit with, and those are my favorite stories. So I strongly recommend all 5 issues. Kang the Conqueror. Okay, so with book number 6, we are finally getting to the first book on this list that is not finished. It will be finished soon. This is an 8-issue miniseries. 6 issues have already been published, but I am talking about Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. This is written by Tom King with art by Bilquis Evely. This is my first Supergirl comic. I know nothing about her whatsoever. I got this comic just because Tom King was writing it. And I know he is a divisive writer, and not everybody likes Tom King. This is one of his better comics. This is obviously, it's one of my favorite comics of the year because it's on this list. It's a story about Supergirl and this girl right here, Ruthie, whose father is murdered by this guy whose name is Krem. He's a real jerk, and he murders her father, and she asks Supergirl to kind of come help her track him down and exact revenge on this guy. This is basically the plot of the Western movie True Grit, with John Wayne, about a girl enlisting a notorious badass to help her track down her father's killer. As far as the actual story structure goes, this is nothing new, but it's told from Ruthie's perspective, and she is very verbose. She has a lot of thoughts, and each issue is narrated by her kind of telling the story of their journey across the galaxy to track down her father's killer. And I have no idea how this is going to wrap up. I can't imagine Supergirl will condone like a revenge killing, which is kind of where this seems to be headed, but I don't really care. This is one of those books where, like, I don't want to say it grows on you more with every issue, but it does a really good job of peeling back layers of the onion. Every one of these issues has been solid, and unless it completely bungles it in the final 2 issues, I can't see this story dropping in quality by the time it's over. It's an 8-issue story. Number 6 just came out, so there's still time to catch up on Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. I strongly recommend it, even if, or even especially if, you are not familiar with Supergirl. It takes place on other planets, so we're as unfamiliar with everything that's going on as our lead characters are. So just read it. It's a good book. Trust me. Okay, so we have reached the halfway point. We are at book number 5 out of 10. I gotta go with this book. I love this pretty much from page one. This writer has become a writer that I am now following. And that's honestly one of my favorite parts about comics, is trying a new book by a creative team you're not familiar with and discovering the writer, discovering the artist, and following them as they go on to do other projects. And Mark Russell is now one of those writers for me. I'm a little late to the Mark Russell party. He wrote the popular book Second Coming for Ahoy Comics that I actually picked up from him in trade paperback form at Emerald City Comic Con. But yeah, his work on this book right here, Not All Robots, from AWA Studios. This is my number 5 book of the year. It's just so good. It's written by Mark Russell with art by Mike Deodato Jr. I have been in love with almost every book that AWA has put out since they started in 2020. I think they just started in 2020, maybe 2019. They're a very recent publisher. They do they do only contained short story miniseries. This Not All Robots is a 5-issue miniseries with the final issue is actually coming out this week, so it's just about over. It's a story about the future where artificial intelligence and robots have advanced to the point where they are the ones that do all of the work in our society. And in order for the humans to survive in this society, every human family is now given a robot. They have to have a robot as part of their family to go out and do work, so the robot can bring home money for everyone to survive and eat and live. I guess you could say it's a play on like traditional like family values. I don't think that's the right word, but like in the old school sense of like the dad went out to go work and the parents and the mom stayed home and cooked and cleaned and the kids went to school and we're good. Everyone's a good little family member. This book kind of takes that and spins it on its head, where there's a lot of really funny scenes of the family kind of waiting around the dinner table, waiting for their robot to come home. And he does come home and he's grumpy because he's been at work all day, and he goes into the garage and you hear these really kind of spooky, creepy noises as he's building a bunch of weapons. And it's a little scary. It's a little confusing, but I don't want to give anything away because I don't think a lot of people read this book, or at least compared to some of the other comics on this list. It's a really funny satire. If you're like me and you're really into stories about artificial intelligence, check this book out. But also, Mark Russell is very good at writing comedy mixed with a social message, which I think is where he's going with the role of robots in society and whether or not it's fair to rely on them for everything we need to survive. Again, like a lot of these other books, it's hard to explain without spoiling. I don't want to spoil it, but things take a dark turn really early in this series, and tensions kind of start to bubble up between humans and robots, and I'm not sure how it's going to end. I'll find out this week. This is one of my favorite books to ever come out from AWA. Not All Robots. Mark Russell's great. He's also writing the book One Star Squadron for DC right now, and it's only 1 issue in so far, but that's another good book. Okay, we are down to number 4 on this list. This is another book from Image Comics. This is the first ongoing series that I have gotten to. Everything else that I have talked about so far has ended, or is just about to end. This book here is the first series that has no ending, and I'm actually really thankful for that because I really love this book. I didn't expect to love it as much as I do. It's from Image Comics. It's written by Kyle Higgins with art by Marcelo Costa, and this is Radiant Black. It's just a great comic. It's a superhero comic, but it's not a DC or Marvel superhero comic, so it's not tied down by old continuity or old characters that you're supposed to know or backstory or villains or any of that. It's a fresh, new superhero story. I think the closest comparison you can make, it feels a lot like Invincible and it feels a lot like Power Rangers, but as somebody who hasn't liked Power Rangers since I was like 6, and also as somebody who really wasn't the biggest fan of Invincible, I don't want anybody who doesn't like either one of those properties to be turned off of maybe trying Radiant Black because it's similar to those two things. It is, but it also works in spite of those comparisons. It's its own thing, but it feels close. Honestly, the best thing about this comic is the writing. Kyle Higgins writes a very relatable story, very relatable set of characters. And the very first panel of this book opens up with our main character's bank balance on his cell phone. He's looking at his financial situation, and he has a whole bunch of credit card debt, and he's got like $30. And he is just right away. You are kind of at least me. I really identify with that, with this character. He is an aspiring writer who is forced to move back in with his parents because he is clearly broke. And just the way Kyle Higgins writes this guy living at home with his parents, hanging out with his friend, trying to get his novel off the ground. I just really identify with that because I was in that exact same scenario when I was his age. Sure, he finds this black hole little thing and it gives him superpowers, and there's this cosmic superhero action element to this book. That's all there. This book is very action-packed and fun. It's also really funny. There's a really good sense of humor in this book, but the main reason I love it is the characters and the writing. It's very real, and I connect with the people in this book. One of my favorite things about comics is its ability to make me connect with characters that I'm not necessarily, that I don't identify with. Like Naomi is a good example. She is a black female teenager who's adopted with superpowers. I don't have any of that stuff. That's not me at all, but I love that book. And one of the best parts about comics is the ability to kind of experience new angles on life. I do love Radiant Black because I'm very familiar with Marshall's living situation and the way he goes about life. It hits close to home, and it's written so strongly. And there are a lot of twists and turns. That book goes in places you might not expect, and I don't want to spoil it, again, because if you haven't tried it, I strongly recommend the trade paperback. That's one of those comics that I think a lot of people might not try because it's new and and you're unsure, and it might not be for everyone, but I love it. And I'm very grateful that I got to meet Kyle Higgins at a Comic-Con over the summer this year. I got him to sign this one, this variant cover for issue 1, and also for issue 3. So yeah, that's Radiant Black. That's number 4. It's actually got 2 spin-offs that are about to come out. There's it's doing well enough to get 2 spin-off series that are being released, I think, in February, maybe March. So keep an eye out for those if you are a fan of Radiant Black, and if not, check out the trade. It's Fire Guy recommended. We're down to the last 3, my top 3 books of 2021. I kind of struggled with the placement on these 3, on number 2 and number 3. Number 1 has been locked in for quite a while. Number 2 and 3 were kind of up in the air. I eventually settled on this book at number 3. I don't have the first issue of this run. This is the other ongoing. I only have 2 ongoing series in this whole stack, which says a lot about my personal taste. I like comics that end and don't go on and on and on and on for 193 issues and just end suddenly, way after anybody cares and everyone has given up. But this book is an ongoing book. This is another book from DC Comics. This is Nightwing, issue number 79. The particular run that I'm talking about starts with issue 78. I was not on the ball early enough to get number 78. I have it digitally, but I started with 79. It's written by Tom Taylor with art by Bruno Redondo. This is another book that I took a chance on. I have never read Nightwing before. I have never been drawn to any of the extended Bat family of characters. Nightwing or Red Hood or Robin, Batgirl, any of that stuff. None of it has really attracted me. I really prefer a small scale Batman story. And that's actually part of the reason why I love Batman the Imposter so much. My number 9 pick, because it's very small and intimate. It doesn't involve Robin or the Joker or even like Commissioner Gordon, really. It's really small. After Future State wrapped up earlier this year, actually it's almost a year ago at this point, Future State ended, and they used the opportunity of the end of Future State and like a new beginning, like Infinite Frontier is what they called it. They relaunched a bunch of series. They put new creative teams on a lot of comics, including Nightwing. Nightwing is good, period. Bruno Redondo does a lot of the heavy lifting in this comic. The art in here is really clean. It is really clear and precise and focused and fluid. It's very action-based. I have a hard time describing art because I have a writer brain, and I'm more drawn to the underlying story structure, and the art has always been kind of secondary for me. Without good art, the story doesn't really flow in the right way. The work of a good artist like Bruno here, it moves the story along in a really good way. And it doesn't, at no point when you're reading Nightwing are you kind of confused as to who was talking or what happened in the last panel or anything like that. It is extremely clear and clean and fun and easy to read. But the story is also lighthearted and fun, and this has consistently been my favorite DC superhero comic of the last year, and I've recommended it to countless people while working at Mill Geek Comics. I think a lot of other people have put this on their top books of the year list for good reason. It's not something you would expect. I feel like most people, when they think about comic books or DC comic books, they're thinking about Batman or maybe Superman. But somebody like Nightwing, who I think is kind of like a lower tier character, he's not Wonder Woman or it's not a Justice League comic. It's surprising how good that book is. Even like the plot is almost secondary. Like, sure, the villain he's fighting is cool. He's like murdering homeless people and stealing their hearts or something. There's some weird stuff going on in there, but it's mainly about Dick Grayson accepting who he is and coming to terms with inheriting a lot of money after the death of Alfred in the main Batman book. But he left all his money to Dick Grayson, to Nightwing, and he is now kind of struggling with, what do I do with this money? How can I best help the citizens of my city? It's just fun. It's a really fun book, and the story specifics are almost secondary. So just read it. Just read Nightwing. The first trade actually just came out, so give it a shot. Okay, so number 2 on my list, the runner-up for my favorite comic of 2021 is a book that I'm actually really happy to see is finally getting the attention it has deserved since it started. I'm going with The Good Asian for my second favorite comic of 2021. This book is written by Pornsak Bishishot with art by Alexander Tefenki. I've been talking about this book for a while now, especially since Comic Tom and I recently just did a segment on this on our last live show. The Good Asian is a 10-issue series. It's almost done. I think it's going to be over in a month or two. There's only a couple issues left. It's about a Chinese-American detective in 1930s San Francisco. And he is one of the first, if not the first, Asian police officer in this city. And even though this is a fictional story, it's very much a real story. It's extremely heavily researched, and it's just really good. I can't explain it. I'm going to let the art do some of the explaining for me while I'm talking. You can see some of the colors here by Lee Lowridge are, honestly, I haven't really ever appreciated color work before probably this year. I'm really trying to pay attention to smaller details in comics, like colors and letters and inks and things I don't normally focus on. But this book in particular really makes me notice the colors. I have brought it up every time I talk about this comic. It's just drawn really well. It's really fun to look at. It is a detective story about Edison Hark, the main character, the detective in question, who is trying to track down the missing mistress of his adopted father. This is just a great noir crime detective comic, which is one of my favorite genres in all of storytelling. I have always been attracted to horror, and I have been attracted to crime storytelling. Not crime in real life. I am not a criminal. I would be a very bad criminal, but I love watching crime movies. I love reading crime stories, and The Good Asian is very much a crime story on the surface, but all around the edges, there's also this really well-made world, and you kind of get drawn into the really racist world of this time. It's the 1930s, and he's the first Asian American police officer, detective in this area. The white cops that he's working with don't trust him. Neither do the Chinese citizens that he is, in their opinion, that he is like ratting out, that he has betrayed by joining the police. So he's kind of like stuck in the middle of two cultures, of two sides of himself. And since he doesn't really have anybody, he's very much a lone wolf kind of. He's very much your classic film noir private investigator type guy, like very much like a Humphrey Bogart kind of character. If you're in the mood for a very noir feeling comic, there's really nothing better right now than The Good Asian. There's an added layer of the social message, the realism, the racism, the historical perspective of this book, and also in the back of every single one of the single issues, there is an essay written by Pornsak, the writer, that goes into the research that he did. So not only do you get a chapter of this great story, but you also get writing from him in the back that teaches you about something from the story, whether it's the immigration process on Angel Island or the telephone operating service that happened. Like it's a lot of detail that goes in here, and it all ties in to what happened in that issue. So it is relevant information that you're learning. You're learning something about the story you just read, but you're also just learning. It's a cool mix of story and also education. All in all, it's a great package, and I am very much hoping that it comes out with a nice deluxe all-in-one 10-issue hardcover. Okay, so we are down to my favorite book of the year. My number one pick for 2021 is another DC comic. If you know me, you probably know the answer. You probably already know this, but I'm going with Nice House on the Lake from DC Black Label, written by James Tynion IV, with art by Alvaro Martinez Bueno. This book is only 6 issues in, 6 issues out of 12. It's actually been on hiatus, and it will come back in March for the final 6-issue stretch of the story. I don't know what to say about this book that hasn't already been said. It's just so good. I can't think of any. It's probably my favorite first issue of any comic I've ever read. There's a twist that happens partway through this first issue, and once I got to that twist, I had to put the book down and kind of process everything and get the stupid grin off my face and open the book back up and finish the rest of the story, which doesn't really happen to me. Usually I can kind of compose myself enough to read a book, but that one, it really hit me, and the story potential with this comic just kind of opened up to me all in that moment, and thinking about where it was going to go and what it meant. This comic is about a group of 12 friends who all know this guy named Walter, who invites them all to stay in this nice house on the lake where they are soon trapped. Walter is revealed to be some kind of shape-shifting alien guy, I guess. We're not really sure exactly what his deal is. He's clearly not from this planet, and he has gathered the 12 of them and secluded them in this isolated place while the rest of the world dies. There's an apocalypse scenario that happens, and these 12 people are it for society, and they are just kept in this house, and the story just kind of details what goes on in this house with these 12 people. And what I love about this comic is how each chapter of this story is focused on a different character. It's a lot like my favorite show, Lost, in that way, where each episode of that show showed what one person was doing on the mysterious island, but then there were flashbacks to show just who they were, how they got there, and this comic kind of uses that same structure. Most of the story takes place in the house in the present day, and then there is a little bit of a flashback sequence, usually at the start of the issue, to kind of fill you in on this person and their relationship to Walter, and maybe their relationship to some of the other characters. And this book, more than a lot of other comics, really rewards a reread, because the further you go in the series, the more you learn about everybody, and you can take that knowledge back to the start of the story, and you suddenly you know more about the characters than you did at the start of the first issue. So it really rewards going back and paying attention to small details now that you know the way things are going and you know who's who. I love this book so much, and I can't put it down, and I really miss it. It's been on hiatus for several months now. I'm just looking forward to it looking forward to March when issue 7 starts again. This book is partly responsible for why James Tynion is also currently my favorite writer at the moment, between this and Department of Truth, and to a lesser extent Something is Killing the Children, but the fact that the same guy is writing all 3 of those comics is kind of astonishing, and he's just extremely talented, and I think Nice House on the Lake is kind of his crowning achievement right now. It really doesn't feel like a DC book. This feels like an indie book. This feels something any other publisher would do except Marvel. The trade paperback comes out in March as well, so if you have not read this book, it's going to be very hard to find issues of it. I know working at the comic shop, working at Mill Geek Comics, I have not been able to shut up about this book, and anytime somebody came in looking for a new book to try, I basically just threw copies of this issue at people. We are out of copies of Nice House on the Lake at our shop, and that's my fault. I have been championing this book ever since it came out, but you don't need me to tell you. This book rules. This is easily my favorite comic of this year, and maybe honestly the last year or two. I'd have to go back and think of my favorite books from 2020, but I can't say enough good things about Nice House on the Lake. So that is my number one pick for 2021. And there you have it. These are my top 10 books of 2021. Um, it's a great year. It was a great year for comics. Thank you for making it all the way to the end. I know this is not something I usually do. I don't usually make my own videos on my own channel, but I'm trying something new. Why not? It's very easy to do a top 10 books of the year, but I like the idea of doing my 5 favorite comics of the month. As each month ends throughout 2022, I'm going to try and do a video counting down my favorite books of the month. We'll see. We'll see if I can actually do that, but that would honestly make my top 10 2022 comics a lot easier. I'll have a lot of books to pick from there to narrow down my list. So yeah, thank you for watching this. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. You know, all those YouTuber things that people say. Keep an eye out on the Comic Tom 101 YouTube channel. I will be there a lot more often than I will be here. Follow me on Instagram, at FireGuyRyan, of course. And thank you again for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.